I carried a blade in the name of God, I kept silence heavier than any chain, and I bore stains upon my soul that no prayer could cleanse. These are my confessions, spoken now because silence has corroded me beyond endurance. Before I continue, tell me where you are listening from. Write your city or land, for every place must share this burden. Secrets lose their power when carried together. I was Guillaume de Rouen, once a knight of the Temple, sworn to guard the holy paths and protect those who journeyed toward Jerusalem. Yet behind the vows of piety and discipline, I carried memories that the chronicles buried. They wrote of triumphs, but I remember shadows. They praised victories, but I recall silence that swallowed every voice. I was not the saint they sang of, I was the keeper of what could never be spoken. The chroniclers celebrated banners raised in triumph, calling them miracles or signs of divine favor. But the same scrolls omit the weight of Ramla, the folly at Damascus, the thirst at Hattin. I stood in those places where certainty fractured, where courage bent, and where silence became our refuge. History records a shining order. I carry the version hidden in dust and memory, where the cost of obedience was measured not in glory, but in silence. Each mark upon my body concealed a memory forbidden to be spoken. The council demanded that we guard not only pilgrims and roads, but truths too fragile for daylight. They believed silence would preserve the image of holiness. Yet silence does not preserve, it corrodes. It seeps into marrow, reshaping men into shadows of themselves. The heaviest burden was not the shield upon my arm, but the vow that sealed my tongue. I faltered both in obedience and in conscience. At times I raised my blade when command demanded it, even when the weight upon my heart was unbearable. At other times I turned aside, choosing mercy over rule, and carried that disobedience like an unhealed wound. Whether I obeyed or defied, the silence remained, binding me tighter than any chain. That is the torment of a Templar, to speak nothing, even to God. Tonight I open the veil, not to glorify, but to confess. What you will hear is not legend, but fragments of memory carved into me like stone. I begin with the threshold I first crossed at Ramla, where dust filled the air and the cries of the innocent shaped the man I would become. If you walk with me into this shadow, know this. What awaits is not glory, but confessions written in silence. The road between Jaffa and Ramla was a ribbon of dust that swallowed pilgrims and merchants alike. We were told our duty was to guard them, but no words prepared me for the day the horizon darkened with riders who did not come in peace. The air thickened, the caravans scattered, and we 9 Templars braced ourselves, not with chants of faith, but with the heavy silence of men who knew what awaited. Beside me rode Raoul de Chartres, little more than 20, eager to prove himself. His hand shook upon the hilt, though his eyes blazed with a fire untamed. Matthias of Tours, older and hardened, muttered only, "Keep your line." Arnulf of Poitiers, grizzled and weary, glanced once at me and said, "Steel will not betray us if we do not betray ourselves." Their words lingered, binding me to the moment as dust rose like smoke. The clash was not glorious, it was chaos, confusion, and cries that tore the sky. I felt my blade strike for the first time, not in training, but in truth, and the weight of it did not leave me. The caravan's wails mixed with the roar of hooves, and silence wrapped around us even as sound deafened our ears. It was then I learned that silence can be louder than any shout. When it ended, the road was scattered with remnants of what once had life and purpose. I looked at Raoul, his armor dented, his face pale. He whispered, Is this the holy work they promised us? I had no answer, for within me echoed the same question. The rules said we were protectors, yet the ground beneath Ramla told another story, one carved not in parchment, but in dust and shadow. The chroniclers would later write of bravery, of how the temple shielded the weak, but their ink spared them the silence that followed us home. We did not celebrate, nor did we pray with joy. We sat in quiet rows, eyes fixed on nothing, each man carrying an unspoken weight. What began as duty had become a burden none of us had been warned of, and silence grew heavier than our swords. That day marked the threshold I could never return from. Ramla was the place where my innocence was buried, where silence claimed me as its prisoner. What came after would only deepen that weight: Damascus, Ascalon, Montgisard. But Ramla was the first seal upon my soul. If these words hold you, then remain with me until the end, for what lies ahead will unravel secrets history dared not preserve. The summer of 1148 carried us eastward toward Damascus, a city whose walls rose like a crown of stone amid gardens and orchards. It was said to be the jewel of Syria, and to take it would prove divine favor upon the crusade. We marched with banners high, but beneath our armor lingered unease. The city shimmered in heat, and already the whispers among us warned that the path chosen was folly. At the council of nobles, voices clashed louder than steel. Count Thierry of Flanders demanded we strike from the west, where gardens promised shade and water. Yet pride led the host to the fortified east, barren and unyielding. Humbert de Fay, a prior among us, leaned close and murmured, "We are marching into hunger." I wished to echo him, but obedience sealed my tongue. To question command was to question God himself. The siege began with fervor, but soon the truth became unbearable. The orchards to the west, abandoned, mocked us with fruit and shade while we withered beneath the sun. Thirst cracked our lips, provisions dwindled, and men who once sang hymns now muttered curses under their breath. I held my post, blade steady, yet inside I trembled. Obedience chained me, but wisdom whispered that each day bled us more than any wound. When the first retreat was ordered, I felt no relief, only shame. Dust clung to our armor as we stumbled back from walls we had not breached, our strength wasted on barren ground. A knight beside me spat into the earth and said, "This is no holy work. This is madness." I had no answer, for my heart had spoken the same words long before. Silence became my shield against despair. The chronicles later blamed division among princes, yet they omitted the cries of the men who withered under their pride. They wrote of strategy, but we knew the truth. We had been sacrificed not by enemies, but by arrogance. I obeyed, as did every brother of the temple, but obedience did not absolve the cost. That silence demanded of us grew heavier than any armor I carried into battle. When we left Damascus, I carried more than dust. I carried doubt, sharp and unyielding, lodged deeper than any blade. For the first time I questioned whether obedience was strength or folly, and whether silence preserved us or condemned us. That wound, unseen, never healed. It shaped every choice that followed, and as we marched toward Ascalon, I knew pride and silence would meet again at the gates of another city. The year 1153 brought us to Ascalon, the last stronghold of the Fatimids upon the coast. For months we surrounded its mighty walls, hearing only the distant prayers of defenders and the moans of our own weary men. The city was a gateway, both shield and sword, and its fall promised the tightening of Christendom's grip upon the Holy Land. Yet with every day that passed, hunger gnawed at us more viciously than any enemy. The master of our host, Everard de Bars, ordered patience, but patience frayed like old rope. The summer sun scorched tents, provisions dwindled, and whispers of doubt spread among the ranks. Raoul de Chartres, now seasoned with years, muttered to me, "We cannot wait forever. Stone does not surrender to silence." His eyes held a spark I remembered from Ramla, but this time it was tempered with bitterness rather than youth. At last, fire became our weapon. We piled timber and pitch against a tower and watched flames climb skyward, devouring wood and stone alike. The roar was deafening, a hymn of destruction, and when the tower collapsed, the breach lay open before us. Men rushed forward with cries that shook the air, and I, too, surged ahead, blade ready, though within me a voice whispered caution. Victory blinded us more than smoke. Inside the breach, chaos reigned. Brothers seized cloth, coin, and trinkets even before the last defenders fled. I saw Raoul clutch a chest of silks, his face gleaming with triumph. I too faltered, my hand brushing against a gilded vessel abandoned upon the floor. For a moment, pride and greed stirred within me, a betrayal of vows I had sworn beneath the Red Cross. That instant has never left me, though the vessel did. The chronicles would later proclaim the victory at Ascalon as righteous, a triumph of faith and perseverance. Yet none recorded the shame that followed us back to camp, the whispers that spread of brothers lost to temptation. Silence demanded we bury the truth, that we present unity to the world. But I knew within myself that victory had come not from discipline, but from pride, and pride is a poison more enduring than any wound. From that day, I learned that conquest does not end at the walls of a city. It continues in the hearts of those who breach them. We had won Ascalon, but in doing so, many of us had lost ourselves. I carried that stain into every battle that followed, and when Montchisard came years later, I no longer believed in miracles. I believed only in the weight of silence and the cost of pride. The year 1177 carried us to the plains near Montchisard, where we rode beneath a sky that shimmered with heat and dread. Saladin's army stretched before us like a tide without end, banners glinting beneath the sun, countless riders moving as if the desert itself had risen against us. We were few, weary from forced marches, our numbers dwarfed yet commanded to stand. To retreat meant surrender of land, of faith, of Jerusalem itself. Among us rode Baldwin IV, the young king marked by affliction, his hands wrapped in linen, his face veiled. Many whispered he was more symbol than sovereign, yet that day his presence held us together. The sight of him upon a pale horse, resolute despite his suffering, forced silence upon doubts. Odo de Saint, Amand, our master, raised his voice only once. We ride not for victory, but for necessity. His words bound us. When the charge began, it was like plunging into a storm of steel and dust. I remember the deafening thunder of hooves, the clash of lines, and the air thick with cries that drowned thought. I rode forward, not with courage, but with desperation, for hesitation would have meant ruin. My blade struck as though guided by something beyond me, yet within I wondered whether faith or despair drove my arm forward. Against all reason, the tide broke. Saladin's host, vast and certain of triumph, faltered before our sudden fury. I saw banners fall, lines scatter, and men flee, who hours before had marched as conquerors. Some called it a miracle, claiming angels rode beside us, that Baldwin's suffering drew divine favour. Yet I, who stood within that storm, saw not angels, only men driven past fear, into something more desperate than belief. When silence returned to the field, it did not feel like victory. The ground was littered with remnants of struggle, and the air hung heavy with smoke and dust. Baldwin was praised as chosen by heaven, and Odo as unyielding in faith, but I felt no triumph, only exhaustion. I whispered to Raoul, "This miracle tastes of ashes." He nodded, and in his silence I knew he too carried doubt beneath the praise. Montgisard was remembered as divine intervention, proof that God still favoured the kingdom, but to me it was a warning. Miracles do not erase cost, they defer it. The host of Saladin would rise again, stronger, more determined, and our moment of glory would echo as provocation. I carried that weight as we rebuilt walls and strengthened fortresses, knowing the storm would return. If you remain with me, let me know by sharing these words, for silence alone cannot carry what is still to come. The Jordan River ran swift at Jacob's Ford, and there we built a fortress meant to bar the advance of Saladin. Chastelet, they called it, strong and proud, its stones fresh cut and gleaming against the barren hills. The masters of our order claimed it would stand eternal, a bulwark of Christendom itself. I believed them, for I wanted to. Yet in my heart I knew walls built quickly rarely hold long against storms of steel. Brother Hugo of Limoges oversaw the works, his mind filled with measurements and mortar. He spoke often of how the walls would resist any engine, how the towers would shine defiance. I remember Matthias, now aged and weary, whispering, "Walls cannot pray." His words haunted me. I wanted to trust Hugo's vision, but part of me knew pride hides easily behind stone. The fortress looked strong, yet within it unease gnawed silently. When the assault came, it fell swift and merciless. Engines roared, stones cracked, and our confidence fractured with each strike. The river carried echoes of splintered beams and falling towers. I stood upon the ramparts, blade in hand, and felt the ground tremble beneath me. Saladin's banners advanced with certainty, while our fresh walls buckled under the first true test. All the promises of permanence dissolved in dust and smoke before our eyes. Matthias fell beside the northern tower, his face calm as if he had expected the end all along. I shouted to hold the line, though my voice cracked with despair. Hugo stared at the collapsing stones, whispering, "It should have held." I could not answer him. In that moment, I knew we had trusted stone more than men, and silence became the only shield left to us as our defences crumbled. When the fortress fell, many were taken and the rest scattered. The chronicles call it defeat, yet they do not capture the true cost, the shattering of trust. The order had believed stone eternal, yet stone betrayed us. I carried the guilt, for I had urged brothers to stand fast, when retreat might have saved them. Obedience chained me again, and silence buried my doubt, though within I knew the truth all too well. Jacob's Ford was no miracle, no triumph, only a warning unheeded. Stone had failed us, and the silence I carried grew heavier, pressing down like unseen weight. I knew then that the storm to come would not be stopped by walls, nor by oaths spoken in cloisters. It would devour us at Hattin, where thirst and fire would test us beyond endurance. If you believe history should not remain silent, let me know by keeping these words alive, for silence alone cannot guard them. The summer of 1187 dragged us across the scorched hills of Galilee, our banners drooping beneath a merciless sun. We marched not with strength, but with desperation, lured into barren ground by Saladin's cunning. The grass had been burned before us, the wells poisoned or sealed, and thirst consumed us long before steel touched steel. Every step was agony, every breath dry ash. Still we pressed onward, bound by command we dared not question. At the head rode Gerard de Ridefort, our Grand Master, his resolve unshaken even as doubt spread through the ranks. He demanded we march, for to stand idle would concede Jerusalem without contest. Some brothers murmured warnings, yet obedience was law. I remember one saying softly, "We march not to battle, but to ruin." I wanted to answer, but silence chained me, as it always had, and so I bore my doubts within. When the enemy encircled us near the horns of Hattin, escape was already gone. Smoke rose as brush and grass was set alight, choking us with heat that seared lungs already parched. Men stumbled, lips cracked, eyes hollow, clutching at empty flasks as though prayer might fill them. We fought not with fury, but with despair, every strike slower than the last. Around us the circle of banners tightened like a noose woven of flame. I watched Raoul collapse beside me, his shield falling into dust, his eyes dim though no blade had struck him. He whispered only once, "Water," before silence claimed him entirely. I wanted to lift him, but my limbs betrayed me, drained by thirst more cruel than any foe. Beside the royal standard, men fought to their last breath to hold the true cross aloft, but even that sacred relic could not halt the storm. At last, the field was broken. The cross was taken, its bearers struck down or bound, and our order lay in ruin. The chronicles speak of bravery and tragedy, but they do not tell you of the silence afterward, a silence so deep it drowned every prayer. I stood amid wreckage, my soul heavier than armor, and knew the covenant of silence had become a curse, punishing us for sins both spoken and hidden. Hattin was no battle. It was a reckoning. It stripped us bare, showing that faith cannot quench thirst, nor silence defend against fire. That day, Jerusalem's fate was sealed, and our order's shadow deepened. If these words reach you now, reflect upon them. Write what you carry within you, for silence without witness devours the soul. And as Jerusalem awaited its fall, I knew our greatest trial was yet to come. When the news of Hattin reached Jerusalem, hope drained from the city as swiftly as water through sand. Walls were manned, prayers recited, but all knew the truth. Without the relic of the cross, without strength of numbers, Jerusalem could not stand. As Saladin's forces encircled the holy city, the cries of priests rose higher, not with triumph, but with fear. I stood upon the ramparts, watching dust rise, and felt the weight of inevitability. The negotiations began, for Saladin knew that Jerusalem would fall, yet he sought ransom rather than ruin. The people trembled as coin and treasure were gathered, each family desperate to secure freedom. In the crowded streets, fear was louder than any hymn. I saw mothers clutching children, men clutching purses, all waiting to learn whether they would walk free or remain bound. The silence of command offered no comfort, only resignation. Among the crowds I encountered Hakim al-Din, a physician in Saladin's service, who offered water to the sick and the frail. His eyes were steady, his hands gentle, and his presence unsettled me more than any enemy blade. He said quietly, "Mercy is the greater strength." I had no words, for in that moment I saw in him a compassion I had not always found among my own brothers of the temple. I faced my own trial when a widow and her young son stood before me, their ransom unpaid, their fate uncertain. The rules of the order demanded obedience, that treasure be gathered for greater purpose. Yet conscience struck harder than command. I slipped silver from the coffers entrusted to me and placed it into their hands. The boy's eyes widened with hope, while my soul recoiled at the breach of my oath. The city surrendered with dignity, its people ransomed and dispersed, its banners lowered without sword. Chronicles later praised Saladin's clemency, yet omitted the quiet reckonings that marked those days. We Templars were spared to rebuild elsewhere, yet within us silence grew heavier than stone. For I had broken a vow, not by cowardice, but by mercy. That act, small to others, became a greater wound than any blade could leave. Jerusalem was lost, and with it the illusion that obedience alone secured righteousness. The silence demanded by the order could not erase what I had done, nor what I had failed to prevent. As I walked away from the holy city, I carried not its relics or treasures, but the weight of secrets unspoken. If you hear these words, let them not fade, share them, for silence without memory becomes the final betrayal. I write these final words by the light of a trembling candle, knowing they may never be read beyond these walls. Age has bent my back and slowed my hand, but the silence I carried has not loosened its grip. What began as duty has consumed me, and what the world praises as honor, I recall as burden. I survived steel, but I did not survive silence. The order grew powerful, feared by kings and envied by lords, yet within us the same silence corroded. Brothers rose to command armies and manage treasuries, but behind their eyes I saw the same shadows. They spoke of faith, of discipline, yet I knew they too bore secrets that words could not release. Power became our mask, but silence remained the true master, binding us long after the banners were lowered. I have confessed battles where pride corrupted us, sieges where obedience condemned us, and moments where mercy defied our vows. Each memory burns still, though decades have passed. The rule demanded silence, but silence is no salvation. It festers, it changes men into shadows of themselves, walking relics of vows they can never break. I kept silence to preserve the order, but in doing so I destroyed the man I once was. Now Jerusalem lies behind me, lost yet eternal, its stones echoing with prayers both answered and denied. I cannot cleanse what was done upon its roads and walls. I cannot unmake the oaths that chained us to silence. But I can give you these words, fragile though they are, so that silence does not erase everything. If my brothers are remembered as saints, let these confessions remind you we were also men. Do not seek relics or treasures from us, for they will tell you nothing. Do not ask what we worshipped, for you would not understand. Ask instead what we carried, the weight of vows, the price of pride, the burden of mercy, the endless silence that devoured us. That was our true inheritance, and it lingers still, a covenant written not on parchment but in shadow. Now the burden is no longer mine. I place it upon you who listen. If these words unsettled you, let them not fade into silence. Leave your reflection, for in speaking you defy the chains that bound me. Do not glorify us nor condemn us. Remember us, for history will lie, chronicles will flatter, but confession remains. And in carrying it forward, you become keeper of the silence I could no longer bear.